Picture this. A towering figure in a sharply tailored suit, lips painted in electric red hair, shaved to the scalp, strutting down a Paris runway like a panther in heat. The year was 1977, and no one had ever seen a woman like her. She wasn't just walking, she was commanding. Her body screamed strength, her eyes dared the audience to blink, and her very presence shattered every conventional idea of beauty. Grace Jones was too dark, too masculine, too fierce, and that was exactly what made her unforgettable. Long before diversity became a buzzword, she stormed the gates of the fashion industry with nothing but her androgynous face, Caribbean fire, and a voice that could slice through steel. She wasn't there to be liked. She was there to be remembered, and remembered she was. But behind the metallic armor, behind the dominatrix costumes and robotic poses, lay a story far more raw than any image could capture. A story that stretched from a strict religious upbringing in Jamaica to the sex-fueled nightclubs of New York, from modeling haute couture in Paris to reinventing pop culture with a whip in hand. She wasn't just a model, she was a revolution, walking, singing, snarling. But what did it cost her to become that icon? And what was the world too afraid to see in Grace Jones? Before she became a fashion renegade and pop culture storm, Grace Beverly Jones was just a little girl from Spanish Town, Jamaica, a land of lush mountains, strict discipline, and unspoken trauma. Born in 1948 into a deeply religious family, Grace's early years were governed not by glamour, but by fear. Her grandfather was a bishop in the Pentecostal church, and her step-grandfather, the man she called Mas P, ruled the household with iron fists and spiritual fire. Grace later described him not as a guardian, but as a tyrant. He believed children were born sinful, that discipline must be physical, and that obedience was divine. Whippings were not rare, they were routine. The house felt more like a church-military hybrid than a home. But young Grace wasn't the type to bow down quietly. Even as a child, she rebelled not with words, but with stares. She would fix her eyes on Mas P as he lectured or beat her siblings, not flinching, not looking away. This defiance would become her armor in the years to come, the same gaze that would later intimidate photographers and silence audiences on the runway. At the age of 13, Grace's life shifted dramatically when her parents moved to Syracuse, New York, seeking a better life. The migration was meant to be an escape from hardship, but it became an entry into another form of alienation. In America, she was suddenly the other Black Caribbean, loud and different. Her accent was mocked, her appearance ridiculed. Other children threw slurs, laughed at her African hair, and made her feel invisible. She sought refuge in art, theatre, music, poetry. These became her playgrounds and her shields. She joined the drama department at Onondaga Community College, where she could finally explore the characters hiding inside her, some powerful, some grotesque, all unapologetically loud. Her performances were strange, magnetic offbeat. She was never cast as the damsel, but always as the witch, the wild one, the mystery. It suited her perfectly. While her parents hoped she'd become a teacher or a nurse, Grace was already daydreaming of stages, cameras, and cities that never slept. Her body even then was misunderstood. Tall and angular, with sharp cheekbones and a voice that rumbled low like thunder, she didn't fit the mold of American femininity. But she didn't want to fit. She wanted to stand out. In a world that saw her as too dark, too strange, too boyish, she began crafting a new identity, not one handed down by family, but one forged in resistance. There was one constant, however, the need to escape. She didn't just want to leave her past behind, she wanted to obliterate it. The discipline of her childhood had planted a defiant fire in her, and by the time she left college and moved to New York City in her early 20s, she had only one goal: to be seen, to be heard. and to never be controlled again. She had no plan, just ambition, a suitcase, and a face that refused to blend in. What the world didn't yet know was that this girl from Spanish Town was about to become the face of chaos and the body of a fashion revolution. New York in the late 1960s was boiling with art rebellion and bodies hungry for liberation. It was a city of extremes where the conservative past collided violently with the psychedelic future. And in the midst of that chaos, Grace Jones, newly arrived from upstate, was a perfect storm waiting to erupt. She started out modestly modelling for catalogues and posing for students at the Fashion Institute of Technology. But even in these minor gigs, she wasn't just another face. There was something arresting about her, a sculptural symmetry in her cheekbones, a feline swagger in her shoulders, and an unspoken challenge in her eyes. Grace didn't smile for the camera. She devoured it. In an industry still ruled by blonde hair and soft features, her look was seen as a curiosity, or worse, a risk. She was often told she was too dark, too severe, too masculine, but Grace took those labels and wore them like armour. She understood early on that the world didn't know what to do with someone like her, and that was her power. Her break came in the most Grace Jones way possible by refusing to be overlooked. While working in Manhattan, she met a modelling scout who was captivated by her unconventional presence. That connection led her to Paris, where everything changed. In France, her skin was not a liability, it was a sensation. The designers there weren't looking for perfection, they were looking for spectacle, and Grace Jones was nothing if not spectacle. She arrived in Paris in the early 70s, where the fashion world was beginning to flirt with danger, abstraction and disruption. Yves Saint Laurent Kenzo and Claude Montana didn't just want models, they wanted muses who could command attention. And Grace, she didn't walk the runway, she stalked it. Almost overnight, she became a fixture on the Paris catwalks. Her look, shaved head, angular frame, hypnotic presence was unlike anything else. She was alien, futuristic, and intoxicating. Designers used her like a weapon. She wasn't just modelling clothes, she was transforming them into performance. But it wasn't just about the look, it was the attitude. Grace was loud, funny, demanding. She arrived late, partied, hard-posed harder. She dated artists, posed nude without shame, and walked into casting calls like she owned the room. And sometimes she did. Paris also introduced her to a crucial collaborator, the nightlife. While modelling by day, she ruled the clubs by night. Le Sept and Le Palace became her playgrounds, places where fashion music and hedonism blurred into one. It was here that she met influential photographers, designers and musicians, all drawn to her raw energy and unapologetic persona. She started singing in underground shows, wearing barely there outfits and towering heels, merging punk disco and art into a surreal spectacle. Her voice, a deep, smoky, more growl than melody, wasn't polished, but it was real. She didn't care for being perfect. She cared for being unforgettable, and unforgettable she became. In just a few years, Grace Jones had mutated from a catalogue model into a living myth, a creature of the night, a force of fashion, and a woman rewriting the rules of beauty in real time. She wasn't chasing the modelling world. She was daring it to keep up with her. By the early 1980s, Grace Jones was no longer just a model, nor merely a singer. She had become something else entirely, a living sculpture, a cultural weapon, a symbol of danger wrapped in glamour. While others posed for fashion, Grace became fashion, bending it, mocking it, reshaping it until it screamed. The turning point was her collaboration with French graphic designer and lover, Jean-Paul Goude. He didn't just photograph her, he mythologized her. Together, they crafted an image that felt extraterrestrial part, warrior part, robot part, goddess. Grace stood naked in geometric poses, her body distorted, like a cubist painting her presence, both masculine and hyper-feminine. She wasn't real. She was more than real. Gowd once described her as the future of fashion, and for a moment it felt true. From magazine covers to music videos, Grace Jones was everywhere, and she didn't ask for permission. She smoked cigars in tuxedos, threw tantrums in couture, and punched talk show hosts who tried to box her in. Her image wasn't about seduction. It was about confrontation. You couldn't just look at her. You had to deal with her. On the runway, she was chaos in heels. Designers begged for her. Issey Miyake sculpted armour around her frame. Azzedine Alaïa embraced her danger. Even the old guard like Saint Laurent couldn't resist her presence. Wherever she went, the room shifted. The music stopped, the air tightened. Then came the music. Her 1981 album Nightclubbing wasn't just a record, it was a manifesto. With songs like Pull Up to the Bumper and Walking in the Rain, she fused reggae, new wave funk and menace. Her voice sounded like sex, wrapped in steel. She wasn't singing, she was commanding. The album was critically acclaimed, shocking and deeply addictive. Her performances became legendary. At Studio 54, she arrived in cages or naked on horseback. She wore metal bras and plastic masks. She screamed, snarled, seduced. A show wasn't just a concert, it was war theatre seduction, all crashing into each other under strobe lights. And Hollywood noticed. Her role as the villainous Mayday in the James Bond film A View to a Kill was more than just casting, it was prophecy. She didn't play the femme fatale, she devoured it. Next to her, even Bond looked tame. Audiences didn't know whether to fear her or fall in love. Often they did both. But success came with a price. Grace was no longer just a model, singer, or actress. She was a spectacle, an expectation. Wherever she went, people demanded the myth. The androgynous terror, the dominatrix diva, the woman who made you feel something even if it was fear. And while she delivered every time, something inside her began to crack. Because even icons need space to be human. Grace Jones didn't just break the rules, she acted like they never existed. In an industry obsessed with softness, compliance, and predictability, Grace built a career out of confrontation. Where others smiled politely, she growled. Where others bent for approval, she stiffened into defiance. She was called androgynous, aggressive, vulgar, even inhuman. And instead of shrinking away, she embraced those labels like a battle cry. She once said, "I go out as Grace Jones and I turn into this monster." But it wasn't a costume, it was a mirror reflecting what the world had projected onto her: fear of blackness, fear of femininity that doesn't seduce fear of women who refuse to yield. Her androgyny wasn't a marketing trick, it was her declaration of war on gender itself. While the fashion world still demanded that women be delicate or men be dominant, Grace appeared in sharply cut suits with nothing underneath, towering over men, with a snarl on her lips and a whip in her hand. She posed nude with her limbs contorted like a Greek statue, challenging the very idea of what the female body should be. She was a prototype for queer aesthetics before the mainstream even had language for it. Grace was embraced by LGBTQ+ communities long before brands began courting them. In the underground clubs of Paris and New York, she became a goddess, not because she fit in, but because she refused to. And when the press tried to box her in, asking if she was gay, straight, woman, man, she laughed. Her only label was iconoclast. But the rebellion wasn't just visual. Musically, she refused to stay in one genre. One moment, she was covering Edith Piaf with aching rawness. The next, she was growling over reggae-infused disco beats. She ignored Formula's producers and radio expectations. When Island Records pressured her to become more commercial, she responded by doubling down on weird working with experimental producers, wearing sculptural costumes, performing in alien tongues. She didn't sell sex, she sold danger, and the public kept buying. Even in her personal life, Grace refused to conform. Her relationships with both men and women were intense, public, and defiantly unconventional. She dated Dolph Lundgren before he was famous, brought him on tour as her bodyguard, and treated him like a living prop in her visual mythology. She challenged every partner, every assumption, every rule about how a woman should behave in love. And when doors closed, she kicked them open. When she was denied magazine covers for being too black or too strange, she stormed into European markets and made editors regret it. When producers told her she'd never be taken seriously in film, she stole entire scenes in cult classics. When club owners refused her entrance, she created her own spectacle outside, sometimes topless, always unforgettable. She wasn't just fighting for herself. She was redefining the space for everyone who had ever been told you don't belong. Because if Grace Jones could belong nowhere and still become everything, then maybe the system was the problem, not her. And yet even revolutions burn out. As the 1990s approached and the world began craving more polish, more accessibility, more mainstream flavour, Grace's raw, unpredictable chaos started to feel too much. But she wouldn't bend, and the industry, as it always does with the unruly, began to look away. Grace Jones didn't fade, she exploded out of view. By the late 1980s, the world she had helped build began turning its back on her. The fashion industry, now obsessed with commercial beauty and supermodel branding, grew tired of her unpredictability. Music executives, chasing radio-friendly formulas, saw her avant-garde artistry as a liability, and the media, always hungry for the next sensation, found her too complex, too dangerous, too unmanageable. But Grace Jones didn't vanish because she lost relevance. She vanished because she refused to be tamed. There were moments of implosion. Her fiery temper, once thrilling, began to alienate collaborators. She famously slapped a British TV host on live television. She stormed out of interviews, trashed dressing rooms, cancelled shows. What had once been seen as iconic defiance now became difficult behaviour. And in a world that rewards submission, her rebellion became expensive. Then came the drugs. The party scene that had once fueled her creativity, Studio 54 Le Palace, the underground clubs of Berlin turned darker. Cocaine, heroin, ecstasy, they were no longer just accessories to nightlife, but anchors. Friends disappeared, lovers burned out, collaborations soured, and yet she kept performing, sometimes brilliantly, sometimes erratically. Her shows became more unpredictable, her persona more extreme. At times, she seemed like a self-parody, a ghost of her former myth. And behind the scenes, even her most loyal allies began to drift away. The recording contracts dried up, the fashion bookings slowed, the headlines stopped. By the early 90s, Grace Jones, once the most dangerous woman in fashion and music, was reduced to whispers. She didn't go broke, but she went quiet. No world tour, no hit single, no major campaign. She appeared sporadically in tabloids, often mistaken for a relic. Some called it a retirement. Others whispered breakdown. But the truth was, more brutal, the world had no space left for someone who wouldn't soften, and she refused to soften. Unlike her peers, who rebranded for middle age, who played the game, who apologised for their edge, Grace never blinked. She simply disappeared into silence. She retreated to Jamaica and France, occasionally re-emerging in boutique performances or art circles, but always on her own terms. There was one heartbreaking constant: she never lost the fire. Even in her obscurity, she remained defiant. She released Bulletproof Heart in 1989, a chaotic album torn between industry pressure and her desire to experiment. It flopped commercially. Critics were puzzled. Grace shrugged. She wasn't interested in hits. She was interested in impact. But by then, the impact had taken its toll. In interviews, she hinted at the toll of always being on, of having to live up to the image, of never being allowed to be vulnerable or ordinary, of being fetishized, feared, and frozen in time. She had become a symbol, but what happens to the woman behind the symbol when no one wants to see her anymore? And so Grace Jones did what few legends dare to do. She vanished without asking for applause. Grace Jones never needed a farewell tour, a greatest hits album, or a Netflix documentary to claim her legacy. She was the legacy carved into the DNA of every outsider who ever dared to challenge the system. Her influence ripples silently but powerfully across decades, in the androgynous beauty of modern runways, in the unapologetic stagecraft of Lady Gaga, Rihanna, and FKA Twigs, in the genderless fashion of Rick Owens, in the loud, proud blackness of Beyoncé's visual albums. Grace didn't just open doors, she kicked them off their hinges. In 2015, she resurfaced with her memoir, I'll Never Write My Memoirs, an ironic title for someone who wrote the book like a slap. No apologies, no rewrites. She told her story, her way, brutal, funny, unfiltered. She continues to appear sporadically in high fashion, in avant-garde music festivals, in glimpses that remind the world she's still watching, still looming, still untouchable. But her greatest legacy isn't a song, a photo, or a headline. It's a feeling, the sensation of being allowed to be too much, too loud, too strange, too black, too queer, too fearless. Grace Jones didn't break the mold, she incinerated it. And in the ashes, she left behind a question that still dares us all. What would you become if you stopped asking for permission, asking for permission, asking for permission?